Excellent. Okay,
Okay.
let's do it,
Celina
Jim.
Stang, thank you very much for joining us to discuss your film and its afterlife, hopefully. Just quickly, Mother Mountain. It's a beautiful, modest, very well directed family drama about the attempts of a very fragile mother to keep her family together after they move to the country. Can is that a fair description? How would you describe this film?
I think that's a fair description. I always like to describe it as a Jewish family that moves down to the South Coast and through their children meet and establish a relationship with an Aboriginal family of local Yuin descent and they feel like they have nothing in common and realize that they have genocide in common for starters because the transgenerational trauma theme in the movie is probably, my greatest incentive to writing the film in the first place, just to try and reckon with
Okay.
that.
I find that really interesting because you have stressed the transgenerational trauma and the connection that you feel between Jewish people and uh, Indigenous people. Uh, you
Mm-hmm.
yourself are the daughter of four Holocaust survivors. Is that true? Yeah.
Yes, that's
Um,
correct.
I have
Yeah.
to tell you, Selena, that watching the film, I found the
Mm.
balance of the emphasis dramatically to be on the mother. That it's a story about a mother, that these other themes that you talk about, while they are there, they don't dominate the
Mm.
narrative. The narrative seems to be focused on the universally relatable plight of a woman trying
Mm.
to hold herself together and to hold her family together and to recognize the flaws in herself in order to move on.
Mm.
What do you say to that?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the fragility and the expression and I guess characterization of the mother. I imbued a lot of obviously my own qualities in her, and I really wanted that grit and grain present in the character. And the fragility is explored as to the whys or warehouse of what is making her so fragile in the first place. And the search for identity and connection to country, and the lack of a kind of concrete sense of that is what really makes her fragility um, so brittle, I guess. So it is a subtle thing, but I guess it permeates every pore of in every scene. There's very few scenes where you don't feel what's going to happen to her next. And you're kind of wondering as to why she has this kind of inability to feel stable and secure in this world.
It's a very honest portrayal of this mother. There are, I guess, a lot of cliches that we see in films about motherhood that you seem to have avoided. I'm interested to know if you were consciously avoiding certain tropes about the portrayal of mothers in this film.
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid lots of stereotypes with the mother and also with the Aboriginal family. I really felt that I do know this place where it was set. I do know the landscape, emotional landscape of being a mother and being a daughter and the interpersonal dynamics in my own family. And I guess that I should probably say I tenuously explored them. The the film is imbued with autobiographical aspects, but I should probably say that they're reminiscent of. There's a huge fiber of truth in there, an emotional truth, but my actual pains and struggles and even healing, were different pains and healing and struggles to what is in the film. It was trying to imagine. I never actually experienced the healing that happens at the end of at the conclusion of the movie. So and I wasn't actually. I should probably mention that we bought the property 12 years ago, and so when I wrote the film, we were imagining living what it would be like to actually live there full time, which was a dream that I hadn't that hadn't eventuated. And then during COVID, when we were actually filming, we moved down there. So it was like this strange life imitating art scenario, which was so crazy and discombobulating, I should say, on so many levels.
So you shot this film on your own property?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's our home now. So, even moving back into it after it was a movie set was a strange thing. But it wasn't as I thought it'd be so hard to kind of divorce myself from that and for it to be a home again, but it's been fine. But the actual area and the place and the people and the Yuin community and my relationship with the mountain, those were real, aspects that I kind of put onto paper in the script. The mountain's a focal character. I mean, living at we're basically at her belly or bosom, which is such a big responsibility, I guess. It took me years to kind of feel comfortable around that and ask for permission and relationship with UN elders. And, just I think that there are certain places that have such strong energy ley lines that, it's not meant to have this banality of just suburbs around it or people living there. And she's a feminine sacred mountain, and she's a dormant volcano, and that she's a character in the film in that she kind of brings up the repressed emotions of this family living at her feet and forces this explosion for them to confront their inner demons, and from those pieces of the explosion they're able to reassemble a new way of being.
I'm very eager to know about the amount of work you put into the father character and to the daughter character and the husband character. Again, in a more cliched scenario, you would have the husband being a bit of a louse, he'd be neglectful, you'd have the previous husband being a prick.
I read your review. You said that there's such an
Yeah,
emotional ambiguity in
it's
every
beautiful because
scene.
the daughter's
I,
saying to the mother, I miss what we left behind. It's part of the beauty of the story here that she has to face up to some harsh realities that are not awful, that are still full of love, and full of wanting to be,
yes.
have a cohesive family. She simply has to accept that people can make wrong calls.
Absolutely. And I mean, that is motherhood. It's the agony of motherhood. Every choice you make has this kind of ripple effect and reverberation of affecting everybody. And I think there's never been more pressure on mothers than this decade, where, in previous generations, I think there was almost this kind of way that things were done. You got married young, you had children, you got a job, you got a mortgage, and that's all gone out the window. Now you've got to be balancing new age. If you're not taking turmeric every morning and having your children meditate and doing yoga, and then there's this hidden danger, and then God forbid you put the burdens of the past, and you don't want to be like your mum, but then there's no rule books anymore. It's gone out the window. And there's nothing more precious than these children. And I explored the mother connection. Obviously, the family comes at the end of the film, and my own relationship with my parents and wanting to be a different mother and not have the baggage that, coming from 4 Holocaust survivors, in my own family, there was a lot of kind of paranoia and control, which is explored in the film. We didn't have this healing where we had this kind of aha moment, epiphany, this is your intergenerational trauma. I can forgive you for, stealing my daughter or whatever may happen. Like it was this kind of thing where I had to kind of connect my own dots. And I'd never seen a Jewish family in a movie before. I'd never seen our own Jewish community kind of exploring what has been really quite widely published in America, is this kind of sense of intergenerational trauma of it. There are these kind of patterns of enmeshment and vicarious living and even catastrophization, and no one talks about it really. And I was writing from a very cathartic place when I first started writing years ago this script, and I had my own healing that was completely different. I kind of arrived on my own with it. And so by the time I was filming, I was in a very different place with my own family. They were very supportive of the film. And in discussions with friends of Jewish descent, because most of the Jewish community here in Australia are from Holocaust survivors. They came after World War II. There were so many, oh my God, me too. Like there's this kind of sense of perfectionism and crazy fighting and a need for kind of control around certain aspects. And I think the Jewish community tends to be, and I'm having to say this on my own because, as I said, there isn't literature around it. And there are no films made of it. You know, there's plenty of films like Woody Allen films. There's lots of overrepresentation of Jewish families and people in American cinema. But here, from, you know, an Australian sense of identity or trying to have one, this kind of sense of overachievement. And I guess this is where I was looking at like the transgenerational trauma of the Aboriginal experience, is this kind of connection to country and returning to culture and as a base for healing is where it seems to be at for the Yuin people here. There's this real sense of we need to re-own the language, we need to re-own the rituals, we need to go up, and it's a very vibrant and alive culture, the Yuin culture here. And for the Jewish people, I think it was a very cerebral connection. It was like my grandmother always said, no one can take away the education in your brain. No one, you know, it was this kind of emphasis on books and achievement in career and perfectionism. And with that came everything's okay on the outside. And, you know, I was always the dark sheep in my family, and I wasn't interested in perfectionism. I was interested in truth. And I felt like there was a real sense of denial around so much that was coming from a Darwinian place of survival. It wasn't just like, oh, we don't like the truth. It was just like, we can't look at it. Anything that's unsavory, can't look at it. So when you say the script is emotionally ambivalent, it's because you know, my biggest goal was to create real people. And unfortunately, a lot of that was injecting so much of myself into it, which was acutely painful. I really thought I'd make this film at a distance. It was an important story to make. And the first thing it was released was the Jewish International Film Festival. And that was like torture. I was like, you know, your own community viewing this. I was like, I didn't make that film for this audience. I don't want people to know me and watch it. I think it's important to talk about uncomfortable things. And, you know, I think I've written a lot of scripts, and I probably won't be pursuing any more kind of scripts that storylines which are autobiographical, put it that
This
way.
is your first film as a director and as a writer. I tried finding background material on you, didn't have a lot of luck. Can you just tell us a bit about your background and how you came to make this film?
I studied a BA in communications. I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker, and I worked on quite a lot of documentaries with ABC, with a production company called Quest Films. I went and shot my first documentary in Brazil, lived in favelas, and I was really idealistic. I wanted to be Che Guevara with a camera. And I never took any classes in script writing, so I looked at drama as like the superficial, you know, empty side of cinema. I was really political. And when I was in Brazil, I shot an interview with a young girl and was so engrossed with her life and realized I could recreate it, you know, through drama. And that was the first screenplay I did. And And then I kind of embarked on trying to learn how to shoot drama through music videos. Um, I mean, I've also always been involved in the plastic arts. So, I went back and did a master's when I became a mother. I think that the whole kind of need for a crew and cast is so intangible to expressing something artistically. So I always kind of return back to fine arts. So I've done some installation work for the City of Sydney. We created the first nomadic art gallery in the world for something called Neon Nomads, which was essentially teepees covered with, the actual fabric itself was an LED screen, and we curated film art on that. And yeah, I mean, this is probably the one film that I really felt, budget wise, I could get off the ground. I could shoot it at my property. I knew the area so well. I had a lot of contacts with obviously the community who were really supportive and giving locations left, right, and center, donated to the production. And we launched an ACF campaign for the Australian Cultural Fund, and we're really successful in that. And, I think that a lot of it was kind of spearheaded on the Aboriginal and Jewish cross-cultural connection of the film's content, and that inspired a lot of private investors. And during COVID, we just found ourselves, hitting the ground
Are you
running.
able to give me some idea about what the final budget on this film was? He asked rudely.
Yeah, I mean, it was after the Screen Australia initial support with the provisional certificate, it came to about
Okay.
just under two.
Congratulations. It's a marvelous looking film and beautifully photographed. It never ceases to stagger me how Australian filmmakers are able to make such high quality films that look good, that look so good for such tiny budgets. Did you have Indigenous cultural advisors on this film? And if so, what role do they play?
Yeah, I mean, even before, so we had a Indigenous producer, Fran Dobby. So she's actually of Yuin descent. And so even before she came on board, I'd been working with some local Yuin, um, the daughters of local elders. And, that's where I really first came to kind of look at the whole kind of common genocide. And I got into in the story of William Cooper. An elder's daughter showed me a picture of bones in Badella, and she was like, I was like, what is this? Are they bones? And she said, yeah, this is the site of a genocide. Um, and once Fran came on board, there's a lot of consultation with the local land councils. Gulaga National Park is actually UN governed, so it's actually leased to national parks. But both Moombala, which is the men's mountain, and Gulaga, the women's mountain, are UN native title. And so we were speaking, there were lots of kind of consultation with the Gulaga board. The original script had a lot more kind of Dreamtime origin stories in the script of that I just didn't feel, obviously as a Jewish voice, I felt comfortable expressing the Jewish kind of side of things. And I just didn't feel like it was my place to put some of those Dreamtime stories in there, even though they were very allegorical and beautiful. And we didn't shoot in Gulaga National Park. Obviously those mountain scenes, they're shot in Kayanga. So, there was a lot of liaising. We had a beautiful welcome ceremony and a lot of discussion. But I mean, consultation is endless, really. For example, with the Dreamtime says no one told us we couldn't put it in there. That was something I just arrived at on my own because I just felt like it's endless, and you kind of just got to get to a point where you need to feel comfortable with
Okay,
what you're
and so it sounds
representing.
like a very creative collaboration or very creative consultation is probably the more accurate way to put it. Is there any imposition on you as a filmmaker to have certain elements or certain things in there with this, with your work with the Indigenous people? Is there any sense of that, or is it just basically consultation and how best creatively to put something in there?
Yeah, I that's where I'm saying that it feels like it's endless. There's no real framework. Um, I it is consultation, and I think through all the feedback you get, it percolates. And there, when there were stories in there that they'd say, "Oh, we feel more comfortable if you'd use this wording," or I would read up on some research I'd done, and there was a story placed in a certain narrative, and they said, "Oh, we don't really feel comfortable with that." And in the end, I actually took them out altogether just because I felt like there was so much conflicting feedback that I just felt like I'd never get to the sides of this thing. And I think, representing the mountain and my own relationship with her was something I felt comfortable with because I, live at her feet. Um, and I can say how she affects me, but I don't want to speak for how what she is to the people, the Yuin people. There is a line where they say she's our people's mother, love, and that is something that is just across the board. The name of Gulaga means Mother Mountain. There are stories of Aboriginal families who, it was a ancient birthing site, and yeah, I guess the original script had a much stronger kind of Yuan presence and representation in the script, and I ended up making focusing more on the Jewish side because that was a voice I felt comfortable,
Okay.
expressing.
It's good
Yes.
that I'm talking to you now that the film has been released, because you worked on this film for how long?
Mm. Oh yeah, years. I
Yeah.
mean, years and years. Probably
Yeah.
four at
So how do
least.
you
Yeah.
feel about, and it was played at you mentioned the Jewish Film Festival. It was at the Gold Coast Film Festival, and you won an award at Cannes. Is that
Hmm.
true?
Yeah, the Cannes
Yeah,
World
you
Film Festival gave it Best Narrative. And it's actually going to be showing Qantas has
okay?
acquired the film, which is actually a wonderful thing. I don't know why I'm more excited about that than anything. And it's been entered in other world festivals such as Venice. And so
Okay.
fingers crossed, or starred, I should
And
say.
what about platform releasing? Do you have any streaming deals in place?
Oh, we're in negotiations, but yeah, nothing sealed
Okay.
as yet. We'll keep you
Please
informed.
do. How do you feel the film is traveling at the moment?
Yeah, I mean we're in negotiations with some international sales agents now. I think it is a slow burn. It's not an American film. I don't think it will really kind of hit home with the American market. The reason we got Radek Latsug involved, I'd shot with him before, but the films I love, a lot of it is Polish cinema, and French cinema tends to be a lot slower and more languid in quality, and allowing people to really see every pore of the human quality rather than, plot points just twisting and turning and throwing off to the next one. So yeah, I feel like it could have a real future in the European market, and we're making forays into that. Um, I don't know if Australians feel that comfortable seeing themselves up there on screen. I don't think we really seem as a nation or even as an industry that celebrates its own cinema until it does well in overseas. I've seen that over and over again. Even ridiculously successful films like Babadook did so poorly here, and those directors are only really celebrated once they hit success overseas. And that's the same with our actors and so many of our talent, which is kind of really disappointing. And even more impetus to make those stories because you can really, I don't know if it's called poppy syndrome or if we're just really highly self-conscious or reflexive, or if we don't really have a Australian identity that is robust enough to celebrate itself. And I really feel like that's something I even looked at in the film, in that I the family dynamic. She has such a kind of brittle sense of self-identity, and that comes from not feeling a connection to country, and that's because she's a refugee. Her family could have ended up anywhere. It was so arbitrary that they ended up in Australia. And her own family, the power dynamics are kind of, all the differences are feared. And I think it's the same with the colonial experience of Australia. If the first, if the first fleet and if the first Australian white colonial experience was one of embrace of the other, of the Indigenous and the differences, we would have had a very different relationship to land and formed a very different nation than we have today. And I think we have a lot of work to do to come to terms with our own sense of
The thing
self-identity.
you said about this continuing syndrome of filmmakers and films have to do well elsewhere before they're respected here. It's a slight generalization, but as you say, there are so many examples of it. It's certainly true. It almost comes back to the age-old cultural cringe that we can't be a little bit more American and have a little bit more confidence and self-assurance that, well, we know this is good and we'll embrace it here. No, the Australian model is somebody else has to tell us it's good, and then we'll back it. It's quite silly and stupid, and it's been going on for way too long.
Yeah, yeah, it's immature, isn't it? It seems like we just have some growing up to do, which I think it's all comes back to connection to country, and still until there is a visceral connection to land. And we've got crazy bushfires and climate. I mean, this is obviously going into politics with the election, but I think that there's all kinds of reckonings across the world around connection to mother, and mother as mother nature. It's almost become a dirty word, mother nature, but I don't care using it because I will.
I'm just going to ask one quick question just about the performance, the central performance. It's quite remarkable. What was your guiding principle in directing that central performance? Because it holds the film together so beautifully. She carries it so well.
Yeah, I mean, Emilie's intelligence and bravery of what choices she makes were what made me cast her in the first place, and the way she related to the material. And Anne Lambert was the same. So she hadn't acted for a long time, and I'd always wanted Anne for the role of the mother just because I wanted her. She's so soft, and as you say, there's an emotional ambiguity. There are no right or wrong characters in this film. That's not the way life is, and I try to really show that there's always grey around things.
Are you going to do another film soon?
Yeah, I have some other scripts. I think that they'll be completely. Obviously, the whole human condition fascinates me, but it will certainly be a different drama without any autobiographical elements. That's for sure.
It's such a beautifully made film, and the level of assurance in the direction is a little uncommon for a first-time film director, if you don't mind me saying.
Thank you.
No
I appreciate that, Jim. I think you get the hardest part in directing is getting the right cast and crew together, and if you have that alchemy, and the story is king. I mean, that was the one when you were talking about what you were saying, what gave you the kind of directing assurances. One of my producers had a relationship with Jane Campion and had worked on previous films with her. And obviously, she's so incredible. And she gave me an hour of her time before I started shooting. And the main thing she said to me was, story is key. If you stay true to that kind of visceral sense of truth, you can't go wrong. And, that was it, really. And with a small budget, you can't really afford take after take after take.